Shabbat Shalom Mishpaka. This video is about the false prophet, and I hope that you will stay to the end before making any comments, because I am going to speak about Paul as a false prophet, and this comes after much study into this matter, and I'm going to bring you some proofs that I hope you'll listen to before you make a comment. And I know how everybody loves Paul. First, I'm just going to start with a quote from Deuteronomy where Yahuwah talks about how to tell a false prophet. From Deuteronomy chapter 13, when there arises among you a prophet or a dreamer, and he shall give you a sign or a wonder, and it comes true. And if he shall say anything like, let's go after other gods or anything like that and serve them, do not listen to the words of that prophet. And in my opinion, Paul's words contradict the Messiah's own words in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. In the Gospels, the Messiah tells you to keep the law, and Paul preaches against the law, that you are saved by grace alone through faith in the Messiah. If you read in the book of Revelations alone, it tells you 3 times that that's not true, that you need to have both adherence to the law and belief in the Messiah. But we're not going to go into that today. We're going to go into Paul the false apostle. In Acts chapter 1, the apostles lay out the requirements for becoming an apostle, because since Judas Iscariot is no longer among them, they need to pick a new apostle. And Paul does not meet the requirements for this new apostleship. For in verse 21, it says, "It is therefore necessary that of the men who have been with us all the time that the Master Yahushua went in and out among us, beginning from the immersion of Yohanan to that day when he was taken up from us, that one of these should become a witness with us of his resurrection." So that is purposeful, that's laid out in the very first chapter of this book of what are the requirements. Paul does not meet these requirements. And all the apostles voted on the few that were chosen, and then were chosen that way. Paul's coming to apostleship was completely different, which we're going to go into. I don't want to go into it too much, but in chapter 2 was the stoning of Stephen at the hands of Paul, Shaul. He is the one who's they threw Stephen's clothes at Paul's feet. There were false accusations against Stephen, probably by Paul himself, and Stephen tells the entire story of the Hebrews from Abraham all the way up to the current day, and he ends his story with first he tells them that Elohim had given these people up to worship the host of heaven, which is exactly what happened to us. And when he is done telling the whole story, he calls them stiff-necked and uncircumcised in hearts and ears, and he says to them, "Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? And they killed those who before announced the coming of the righteous one, of whom you now have become the betrayers and murderers, who received the Torah as it was ordained by messengers, but did not watch over it." And then they stoned him to death and threw the clothes at the feet of Shaul. And Acts chapter 8 tells you, and Shaul was giving approval to his death. And Shaul was ravaging the assembly, entering every house and dragging off men and women of the faith and putting them in prison. Now, before we get into Paul's conversion, I want to jump over to Matthew chapter 24 to show you what the Messiah says specifically about false prophets. "And if anyone then says to you, 'Look, here is the Messiah,' or 'There,' do not believe. For false messiahs and false prophets shall arise, and they shall show great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have forewarned you. So if they say to you, 'Look, he is in the desert,' do not go." He gives you a warning that someone's going to say, "Oh, I saw the Messiah in the desert." And where did Paul have his encounter? In the desert. Let's go to his encounter. In Acts chapter 9, first thing that stood out to me in Paul's encounter was what the angel of Yahuwah said to him. And he said to him, "Who are you, master?" And the master said, "I am Yahusha, whom you persecute. It is hard for you to kick against the pricks." And I was like, what does that even mean? So I looked it up. And it's basically a saying about how a donkey they would have like these pricks behind him to keep them moving. And if they kicked against the pricks, it hurt even more. But the origin of this saying is what really struck me as odd. The phrase "kick against the pricks" was originally used in a Greek play called the Baccha by Euripides, written in the 5th century BCE. In this tragic drama, the god Dionysus, who is the JC character, warns the mortal king Pentheus against resisting divine will, saying it is not wise to kick against the pricks. Now, I highly doubt that the almighty living Yahuwah would be using a line from a play about Dionysus. Now, I want to get to the part where Paul contradicts his own saying. He tells this story twice. First in Acts chapter 9, he tells the story about what happened to him. "Master, what do you wish me to do?" And the master said to him, "Arise and go into the city, and you shall be told what you have to do." And the men journeying with him stood speechless, hearing but indeed the voice, but seeing no one. So he says they heard Yahusha but did not see him. Let's go to Acts chapter 22, where he tells the story again. Now in Acts chapter 22, he contradicts. He says exact opposite. "And those who were with me indeed saw the light, but they did not hear his voice speaking to me." That right there tells you that Paul is a liar. Also, Hananiah, the man who went to Paul's place when he was sitting blind, where that Yahuwah told him to go there, there's no mention of this man anywhere else in the Bible. And always when they introduce someone in the Bible, they give a genealogy saying Hananiah, son of blah, blah, blah. This character, no mention of who his father is, who he's descended from, just this random guy who is a lover of the Torah. Jeremiah chapter 14:15 said, "Yahuwah said to me, the prophets prophesy falsehood in my name. I have not sent them, nor commanded them, nor spoken to them. They are prophesying to you a false vision, worthless divination, and the deceit of their own heart." Matthew chapter 7, verse 15. "But beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are savage wolves. By their fruits you shall know them." And his fruit is his doctrine is opposite of the Messiah's and opposite of the Father. "Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? So every good tree yields good fruit, but a rotten tree yields wicked fruit. A good tree is unable to yield wicked fruit." Yahusha gave many warnings of false prophets and even false apostles. In Matthew chapter 24, verse 11, he says, "And many false prophets shall rise up and lead many astray." And he has an entire religion behind him. In verse 24 of the same chapter, he says, "For false messiahs and false prophets shall arise, and they shall show great signs and wonders." And Paul did that, show us to lead people astray, if possible, even the chosen ones. Now, this video is getting way too long. I have way more to share with you, so we're going to go into a part 2.